Well, again, welcome to our Living Wisely, Living Well webinar tonight. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi, and we are reading from Swami Kriyanandaji's book, Living Wisely, Living Well. And today's reading is October 14th, and Swamiji writes, "People are more important than things. This is a basic principle at our American Ananda communities, which my Guru founded through me. It is a good principle for your own life also. By things, I don't mean objects only, but plans and projects of all kinds. Consideration for other people will also help to ground your ideas, making them more realistic and ensuring that what you want to accomplish is right. Remember too, people refers not only to others, but also to yourself. Your spiritual progress is more important than anything else in your life." This really was a key principle in Swami Kriyanandaji's life, in the way that he founded Ananda communities and ashrams, and really in the way that he treated people. And it was really, for me, it was a real education, because I don't know that I've ever seen such graciousness, such kindness, such warm-heartedness, and constantly thinking of giving to others, as I did with Swamiji. And it was interesting because it's not like he was treated always well in his life. He was betrayed by his own fellow disciples and scorned and persecuted by them. So he had every reason to behave that way towards others, if you want to use a worldly approach to things. This approach is typified by a movie I once saw that really highlighted this point of how one person's actions and one person's behavior towards others can have a real ripple effect. In this movie, it was in a negative way, but it was a comedy movie, so I think it was humorously trying to show what happens when we are unkind towards others. The movie was starring this American comedian, Danny Kaye, and he was in some sort of the hierarchy of law enforcement, I think it was. And he was at the very, very bottom of the hierarchy. And it showed in the movie, it showed the chief of police or whatever in the office talking to his underling and yelling at him and abusing him, and finally he slapped his underling. And so this man went stumbling out of the office, very angry, and he was looking for someone that he could vent his anger on. And he saw someone who was beneath him. And he went up to this person and pushed him and punched him and screamed at him. That person too, when it was over, looked around for someone he could vent his anger. And eventually it came on to the hero of the movie, who was a very kindly man, Danny Kaye. And someone kicked and slapped him and yelled at him for no reason, just because he was beneath them and they were wanting to vent their unkindness and anger. And he, because he was the lowest of the low, he looked around for someone that he could do this to. And there wasn't anybody left because there was nobody beneath him. And so finally he noticed this very mangy, decrepit-looking street dog. And he went up and very half-heartedly he kicked the street dog, sort of in mock anger. He didn't really cause any harm. But it was a very good example of how much impact the way that we treat others really has a ripple effect. And this is why Swamiji talked in this reading about consideration for others. And at Ananda Sangha, and I lived at our Ananda community in California for almost 40 years, and it was really extraordinary education to see how when people express kindness, consideration for others, even when there's an intense project happening where we have to push ourselves and sometimes push each other in certain ways, it was always done with kindness, with respect, and with love. In all those years that I spent at Ananda Village, I never saw one heated argument where people were yelling at each other. And it was very interesting because I visited one other spiritual community before I came to Ananda 40 years ago. My very first day there, I saw an extreme heated argument between two people. And so what Swamiji's words are not just words, they really are an expression of his life and how he lived, how he acted, how he behaved towards others. And this, you might say, well, this is just a saint, and that's how they tend to behave. But in fact, watching Swamiji over the course of his life, I could see that it was not always easy to, he didn't have any tendency ever to be unkind. But because of the way that he was treated so unkindly at times, I could see that he could have had every excuse to be unkind to those who were against him and attacking him. And yet, he overcame any even slight tendency to turn against others. And you might say again that this is the mark of a saint, but it also is the way to saintliness, is to love, to forgive, to show consideration and kindness to others. Swamiji once remarked, he was asked recently towards the end of his life, I think it was in the last year of his life, what he would like his legacy to be. And Paramhansa Yogananda was once asked, when you are gone, what can take your place? And Yoganandaji said, when I'm gone, only love can take my place. And Swamiji, he was asked in this interview, by the person who was asking him questions, they quoted the story of Yoganandaji, and they asked Swamiji, how would you answer that question? What would you like your legacy to be? And the biggest part of his answer was, he would like his legacy to be that of kindness. And he told the story of somebody visiting Ananda village and talking to Swamiji about what he experienced. And Swamiji, it was one of the most touching stories of anyone who had ever visited Ananda, and it touched him very deeply because it was something that was very important to him. This person said that he could not believe the extreme kindness shown not just by one person, by two people, but by everybody he met at Ananda village. And Swamiji saw this as sort of the greatest testimonial of his own life in the ripple effect that treating others with consideration, with kindness, with love, with compassion can have, and how it touches not just the life of the person you're impacting and talking to, but again, it touches many, many, many lives. And in a way, this is a responsibility that we all have in living our lives. It's very interesting that a few of recent years, there have been many, not many, but several accounts, very interesting ones, of people who have had near-death experiences, where they actually died and left the body and had an experience of the astral plane, and they came back. And one of the common themes is that life is not what we think it is. What we tend to think is important, becoming successful and career and fame or wealth or all these things, in the end have really no significance in the eyes of whether it's the Lord of the universe greeting these souls on the other side. What is important is how much people loved, how much people expressed that love, how they were with others. And so in some ways, this is almost the most important thing in our outer lives, is the way that we treat others. Swamiji tells a story, again, how this touches people and how much impact it can have on people's lives. He went to a store once in Italy. He was visiting on vacation. It was a place he never went, except a couple of times. And he went into a shop, and he showed very extreme kindness to the shop owner. And at the hotel he was staying at, he tells the story, Swamiji does, the hotel gave him a bottle of wine as a gift that they gave to all the guests. Because he didn't drink alcohol, he brought it as a gift to this shopkeeper, who was extremely touched and even tears by it. And interestingly, Swamiji went to that same town a whole year later, and he went into that shop, and the woman, again, tears were flowing at the remembrance of how this one person treated her with such consideration and kindness. And you can't help but think that that act of kindness by Swamiji reverberated in her own life as a shopkeeper, and that she probably started touching her customers with that same love and with that same kindness. So treat others with this extreme kindness, compassion, consideration. You will also find in the end that you are the one who is changed the most by it, that you are the one who is blessed the most by it. There's a saying in the Christian Bible, which is that, judge not, lest ye be judged. And it is Christ who is saying that. And Yoganandaji, in his interpretation of it, He said that the manner in which we judge others, that in the end we will be judged the same way by divine law. The way he puts it, whenever you talk against another person for the love of gossip or in order to satisfy your talkative instinct, remember, you will be judged by your Heavenly Father in the same way. For whatever you give out, the same will you attract. If you peddle the weaknesses of others, the divine law will mysteriously bring about the publicity of your own inner faults. And so this is the law of karma. But this law of karma very often acts in a more inward way, rather than just in a more outward way. And so Yoganandaji even talked about how when we have to pay the price of our karma, the day of judgment, if you want to call it that, at the end of life, if we have been non-judgmental towards others, then we will not be so judged harshly by the divine judge. And in the end, in fact, it's not some outer divine judge who is judging us harshly, it's really ourselves. And this alludes to something that Swamiji discusses in this reading today, where we'll see that those who are very harsh in judging others tend also to be very harsh towards themselves, and they are less forgiving towards their own faults, and they're hard on themselves, and they're miserable creatures in the end, those who are the most judgmental. And so this thought of judge not lest you be judged really expresses one of the deepest divine truths and guides towards right behavior, which again is to treat others with divine consideration. Try to see all beings as children of the infinite, as our brothers and sisters. We all have the same father and the same mother, so really we are all brothers and sisters. There's a beautiful saying that comes from one of the ancient scriptures of India, which is that the guest is God. And Swamiji, in founding our retreat facilities at Ananda Village, asked them all to use that as their motto. And you'll see it occasionally inscribed on a wall or an entryway at our retreats. The guest is God. And in fact, the guest is God, because we are all made in that divine light. And that one of the great ways that saints and masters bless people and awaken them spiritually is that they see that divine light in each one of us. And by seeing it, by recognizing it, they actually, in a way, they fan the flames of that light, and they bring it out and they bring it up more strongly and more clearly. You see this with people who work with plants and have what's called a green thumb. I've spent many years as a gardener working with plants, and you see from a study of people who have really gone very far, like the great Luther Burbank, who was a great plant developer in the United States, and George Washington Carver, another one, you would find that they had an extreme amount of love for the plants that they worked with. And because of that love, they brought out the qualities of the plants. Luther Burbank, as we read in Autobiography of a Yogi, he gave Paramahansa Yogananda a gift of spineless cactus. These are cactus that have no spines for protection. And Luther Burbank says that the way that he bred and developed this spineless cactus, which he had been trying to work with for many years, and it took some time, is that he bred successive generations of this cactus. And he kept telling the cactus, you don't need your spines anymore because I will not harm you, and you do not need their protection. And he said as a result of that love that he gave to those plants, those cactus lost, over succeeding generations, lost their thorns, lost their spines. And we have had some of these descendants of these cactus at Ananda Village, and they are very smooth on the outside. They don't have their spines anymore. And so it's the same with people. If you love them, they will lose their thorniness, their defensiveness, their anger, the hate. It can take some time. It can take a lot of patience. But in the end, this is almost the divine mission that we've all been given in working with each other, is to express those qualities and try to help to change each other through this act of consideration, kindness, divine love. Now, There's a beautiful passage in the Bhagavad Gita, and Swami Kriyananda, in his book Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, this is from the 16th chapter, at the very beginning of it, he describes this part of the Gita as the nature of the godly and the demonic. And it's very interesting because this is where Lord Krishna describes the qualities of a great saint. And so it's interesting because there are many of them, if not most or all of them, are very human qualities. They're not what you would consider divine or godly qualities of an avatar, for example. They are human qualities which express sanctity and divine energy. And some of these are what we've been talking about: kindness, consideration, forgiveness, charity, all these things. Swamiji introduces this chapter, and it's a very interesting chapter to read if you want to work on and develop and change yourself by developing these positive qualities. Because essentially Krishna is saying in this part of the Gita that we do have the divine responsibility to work on ourselves and to develop these divine qualities in a very conscious way. They're not something that are just given to us by God, but something that we do have to develop. And this is how Swamiji describes this section in the Gita. He says, Krishna now relates 26 qualities that ennoble the mind spiritually. The goal of spiritual progress, as Swamiji writes, is, as has been repeatedly emphasized, the transcendence of ego consciousness in the realization that separateness from other selves and from the absolute self is the one great delusion from which all other delusions derive. Isn't that interesting? Swamiji says very clearly and strongly that the delusion of separateness from other selves, from other souls, is the one great delusion from which all other delusions derive. And you can see this in human conduct: competitiveness, religious wars, country wars over land, over greed, over wealth. This really is the one great delusion from which all misery and suffering derives. And Swamiji goes on to write, the sense of individuality is rooted in infinity. There is no other reality but the self. And he says capital S, the higher self. God, the self of all. In himself, he is ever conscious, ever existing, ever new bliss. No one created him. He is self-existence. A spiritually ennobling quality, therefore, is one that can lift us toward that awareness. That's a very powerful statement also, that a spiritually ennobling quality, even though a human one, can lift us towards divine awareness and divine awakening. And so it's not just about practicing meditation and living a holy inner life. It's also about expressing divine qualities, working on it, on these things. Unless you can meditate 24 hours a day, you are going to have time when you're with others, with family, with co-workers, with friends. And really consciously try to express and develop and really grow into these divine qualities. And here Krishna, he describes what these qualities are. Chapter 16, stanza 1. The Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, purity of heart, perseverance in the acquisition of wisdom and in the practice of meditation, sattvic charity, self-restraint, the performance of holy rites, symbolic self-offering to God and the devas, service to holy persons, and agnihotra, pouring oblations into the sacred fire, study of the scriptures, self-discipline, straightforwardness. These are some very interesting ones. Straightforwardness. Isn't that we don't think of that as a divine ennobling quality, but I think probably in your life you will remember someone in your life who was straightforward, and that quality is striking and it is ennobling and very true indeed. And then stanza 2, he talks about some more that we've been talking about. Again, very ennobling, very human qualities, but divinely ennobling. when we can start to practice them in our lives. Harmlessness, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, disinclination toward fault-finding, kindness to all, non-covetousness, gentleness, modesty, not calling attention to oneself, steadfastness of purpose. This stanza by itself can be a real guideline on how to become a saint by simply the way that you behave with others. Harmlessness. Always act with a sense of being aware that words that you say can harm others by belittling them, even when it's done with a humor but in a biting way. Truthfulness. This doesn't mean truthfully telling everybody all of their faults, for example. Swamiji has very often said the analogy of if you see someone who, say, is very sick, they're suffering from the flu, for example, or a fever, and the truthfulness would be to look at them and say, you look really, really terrible. And Swamiji says, in a way, that's not truthfulness. It might be stating a very outward fact, but the truth is that this soul in their divine self is beautiful and blessed. Yoganandaji once looked at a few of his disciples, and he said to them with a blissful tone in his voice, he said, you have no idea how beautiful you all are. And he saw them all as divine light, as children of the infinite. So Swamiji said truthfulness in such a case, if you're with someone who is really quite unwell, is to say, oh, you're looking better, or oh, you're looking well, as a way to affirm their wellness and give them energy. Another one of these in the second stanza, freedom from anger. How do we develop this? Very simply, it's to meditate more. Anger, someone recently, just a few days ago, was telling me that they have this tendency to be angry over things that are truly wrong in other people, faults that they have. But in fact, this person, they knew by asking me how to overcome it, that they were the ones that were being hurt by recognizing and looking at other people's faults. This is disinclination towards fault-finding that Krishna mentions in this very stanza as being something that we should really positively develop as the positive antidote towards finding fault in others. Tranquility. Tranquility in all situations. You will find that those who are calm amidst life storms, that in fact you will find that you remember those people and that their calmness can actually have a very calming effect on your own self. You'll see that a parent who's trying to struggle with a child, and I think we've all seen this, a child who's acting up and screaming in public, and the parent gets all upset and ruffled themselves, and it just creates a feedback loop where they keep agitating each other. And then you'll also see a wiser parent, a calmer parent, who is not ruffled at all by the child acting up and throwing a temper tantrum. The parent remains calm, and sooner or later the child starts to calm down. So again, these are divine qualities. Kindness to all. It's very simple and very clear. Not kindness to some people, kindness to all. Non-covetousness. In a way, non-covetousness is a form of kindness, because when you see someone, you're not thinking about what you can get from them, you're thinking instead of what you can give to them. And you can give to them very simply kindness, compassion, joy, to uplift them in some way. So this really is a central truth to human relationships, which is thinking in terms of giving rather than taking. And you'll find that if you go through your human relationships and experiment with this sometime. Tomorrow, let's say, have an experimental day, a day of giving to others. And it doesn't mean giving things. It really means giving kindness, giving appreciation, expressing appreciation. Do this with God also and with the Guru. Express positive sentiments and express appreciation and give your heart's love to them rather than asking them, what are you going to give me? And if you think in terms of always giving love to God, to the Guru, to others, you will find that you become so much happier in that act because your sense of self starts to expand. You're no longer contracting into your little self. You're starting to dissolve that little self that becomes very brittle and very small, and by expressing and expanding your love and your giving, this is really I think Yoganandaji called it the social way to cosmic consciousness, which is thinking less of ourselves, giving more to others, and it does start to expand one's consciousness. Now, the next stanza, which I'll just stop at this one, there are more in this chapter, which is a very, very enlightening chapter of the Gita, and very educational. Stanza 3, he describes some more of these divine, ennobling qualities. Radiance of character, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, absence of malice, absence of self-conceit. These qualities, O descendant of Bharata, are the endowments of those who are divinely inclined. And in fact, by consciously working on these qualities in our own self, we can start to become divinely inclined. And I would suggest looking at this list that Krishna gave us and really taking it in the spirit that he gave them, which was as very, very sincere and very, very effective advice on how to change ourselves and become saintly, just simply by behaving in the right way. Yoganandaji said that it's not hypocritical even to behave a certain way if you are trying to develop a particular quality that you may not have. And he tells the story in this regard of a hunter who was a very, very good hunter. He had a gun and he shot birds, and he was so good that he started killing all the birds in this whole region that he lived. And finally one day, there were no more birds left to hunt because he had killed them all. He was very sad because his life was all about hunting and killing. And so he started walking and started looking to find more birds to kill. And one day he came to a river and he saw a saint bathing in the river. It was a sadhu wearing a Swami wearing an orange robe. And the Swami was bathing in the river, and all these birds were coming to him and landing on him because they saw that he was a great sage and that he had divine love in him and he was expressing it, and they were attracted to it. So all these birds landed on him. And this hunter had a really, really good idea, which was that when the sadhu left, he would put on some orange robes, he would go out into that river, and all the birds would start landing on him, and he could pull out his gun and start shooting those birds. Very clever. This is exactly what he did. He went out into the river, and these birds started landing on him. And because of the love that they were feeling towards him, even though he was pretending to be a saint, it changed his heart. And he actually started feeling that love. And he realized that it felt so much better to love birds rather than to kill them. And so this is a deep truth, that it really does feel so much better. It is divinely ennobling, uplifting, changing of our consciousness to express all these divine qualities of consideration, kindness, compassion that Krishna has given to us and that Swamiji has given to us in this reading. So take these principles, take just one or two of these qualities and start experimenting with ways of applying it in your life, and you'll find that you really can become divinely ennobled through very, very simple actions in daily life. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.